let's talk about the fake news up there in old Warren County, New York. You see, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to spend millions and millions of dollars to fix something that's not broken. When you have a lake that's massively polluted with sewage and chemical waste from the local bankster gangsters owned mills, you see the banks in Glens Falls, the banks in New York, the banks in Ticonderoga, they own those mills. And when they dumped all of that slop into Lake Champlain, right in front of Fort Ticonderoga, they had to flush it. They've been flushing Lake George for well over a century and a half. But the fake news, the Glens Falls Post-Star particularly, the fake news covers it all up. And every single time they flush Lake George, they get rid of all the sewage-laden, leachate, poisoned waters of Lake George that, well, there's algae blooms on Lake George. Isn't that fascinating? Chris Nowinski and the Darren Freshwater Institute that have found a fortune in studying it rather than cleaning it up. You can make a fortune studying it forever, but actually fixing the problem, that takes a lot of money. So we just study it instead and make ourselves out to be grand champions of the people, and the Post-Star aids and abets the whole scam. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they're hiding other news too. The geology in New York is massively contaminated with radioactive rock. The wells, the radioactivity in the Adirondack region is massive because of all the minerals. They got minerals in the ground, all kind of metals and uranium and thorium and every other kind of imaginable radioactive element in existence, exist in abundance in the Adirondacks. Just like in North Korea, they're sitting on trillions worth of minerals in the Adirondacks, and they're keeping that all quiet too, right, Ken Kingsley? The Glens Falls Post-Star and a bunch of the other news up there is nothing more than fake. It's all fake news, and they pander to their buddies down at the Glens Falls banks. It's been going on forever. Every single time they flush Lake George, every single time, Andy Cuomo, they flush Lake George. Sheriff Bud York, District Attorney Carasone, every single time they flush that lake, they're destroying shorelines and boathouses and docks. They've been doing this wintertime drawdown. They draw the lake down because the Dam 230 is nothing but a joke. They spent $150 grand upgrading it after 1974. Then they inspect it in 1980 with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the dam's 56% incapable of controlling lake levels. So they got to dump a huge amount of water out of Lake George every winter, flushing the sewage and the leachate from Lake George. Dilution is the solution to pollution, Ken Kingsley. The Post-Star is sitting on this story because they're gutless wonders. Fake news. The only reason Lake George hasn't turned into a slop mess like Lake Champlain is they flush it. They've been flushing that toilet lake forever to keep the real estate values nice and high for the Glens Falls gangster banksters. Now, for the radioactivity in the ground, the Glens Falls Post-Star has been provided scientific proof that what I'm saying here about the radiological geology of the Adirondacks is a fact. And they're covering it up because they don't want to hurt the real estate values. They don't want people to realize that that hot, steamy shower they're taking, they're breathing in all that radioactive water in the steam as they stand there in that steamy old shower. And then, of course, they're drinking the garbage. Why don't you ask Coach Mike about stomach cancer, Ken Tinsley? Why don't you ask all the other, well, let's see, Warren County's got the highest cancer rates in the state, and New York State's got the highest cancer rates in the nation. So let's see, Warren County's the cancer capital of America. But let's not discuss that, right, Post-Star? Let's keep that under wraps. Albany Times-Union and Troy Record and Channel 6 and Channel 10 and Channel 13. Let's keep the radiological rock. Let's keep that radioactivity secret. And every single time you flush the lake, every single time they dump a bunch of sewage in Lake George, or, dump a whole bunch of sewage into Ticonderoga Creek, or all those mill wastes and all those poisons and toxic chemicals that they flushed into front of Fort Ticonderoga, they've been doing this for decades, Ken Tinsley. He's the grand poobah there at the Post-Star. How about it, Glens Falls Post-Star? Why do they do this wintertime drawdown? Is that when they're diluting and making room for a lot of the fresh water in the spring so that they can control the massive poisoning of Lake George? And the answer is Governor Cuomo's spending millions to study it. Why do you spend millions of dollars to fix something unless it's broken? Now I'm going to put it to you like this. When you're in a boat that's leaking and it's floating in sewage, you got to bail it out or you'll sink in the sewage. And that's exactly what they're doing by flushing Lake George. Continually flushing Lake George in the wintertime. That's what destroyed Clifford and Anita Witham's marina repeatedly. And David Wick and Roger Smith and the director of New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, you can't change those facts. But boy, you sure can keep them quiet and silent and cover up the records, can't you? You see, Post-Star, you're extremely well aware of the fact that these records have been requested under the law from the state for quite some time, and New York State is dead silent. Crickets, because they're covering up and whitewashing.